Hello, wonderful people. How do you do? Welcome back, everyone, and we are about to embark on a journey that I think we've been waiting for a long time. But what? Huh? Who's this? What's going on down here? Hello. Hello, everyone. Hey, Mr. Halfbit, say hi. Tell the people who you are. I'm just kidding. Indeed. And hey, folks, there's a really good reason why Mr. Halfbit is here. We've talked a little bit about the origins of your name, right, Mr. Halfbit? Briefly. What is that? It's a portmanteau, I believe, Mr. Halfbit. What is that a portmanteau of? N-
to stream, I didn't want to use the word halfling or hobbit in my name, so I went with halfbit.
Indeed. So, you've got a name which is essentially a combination of Hobbit and Halfbit. You have got a you have got a lifelong love of this series, as do I. What would you say? What do you think is the first time you ever read this, and what was your first exposure to it?
I mean, I was in just like fifth grade. I was homeschooled actually, and like one of the first series we started reading and learning about in. Well, we read The Hobbit first, and then soon after, quickly after, we started reading Lord of the Rings, and yeah, I fell in love. And honestly, right, we were reading the books right coinciding as the movies were coming out.
Okay.
Uh, so
Yeah,
it
the
was
movies
pretty.
were one of the things that got me sort of to recognize, like, oh, hey, there's something going on over there. And so I didn't read it until a bit later than that. As a matter of fact, my copy of the trilogy, which is a paper bound, all three books in one binding, and it's real beat up at this point, but it has art from the movies, so it clearly post dates the movies. So yeah, it was a great time, and I think you and I have had honestly a lifetime kind of influenced by those. Right, we play a lot of
100%.
a lot of RPGs.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
As you can see, got Middle Earth behind me there on the wall. So
Indeed, you got yourself set up a bit there.
yeah.
Fantastic. All right, and I want to say hi to the folks who have joined us today. I'm seeing Dahlia in chat there. Dahlia, thank you for the audio heads up. I think we got that taken care of. Vane, hello. Marion Vera Cobra, Missy, Call Me Frodo Baggins, which I believe Call Me Frodo Baggins is a name that I do not recognize. I don't think I've seen them around before. Good Courage, Bitter Bard, hello, Little Lucy. I'm glad you made it. Don Bricks, y'all. I hope you're excited for tonight. Now, and Sika's back. Hello, welcome back, Sika. So Sika Storm, Sika Tarstorm. I don't know why I keep missing out in that middle bit. This, I would say, is much closer to what we typically do here on Sidecar Stories. Except I've got a special guest here today to perform one of our voices. This is going to be super exciting, as y'all have hopefully been able to gather from his fine pedigree. Mr. Halfbit is like a fantastic option for one of our voices today. It's going to be particularly appropriate. But this is weird because I have got Mr. Halfbit here just sort of hanging out while I have the stuff that I typically talk about, which is, hello everyone, my name is Sam, this is Sidecar Stories. We stream stories here, and I typically stream Tuesdays through Thursdays, and you can find more about that with the links command right here. Not kinks command, actually, as I just accidentally typed, but links command. You can find the Discord where I do a lot of my chatting midweek, and that is where you can find me usually. Now, of course, this week you can find me here at all hours of the day because it's Book Fair. Book Fair is our big yearly event. This is the first annual Book Fair. This is the Sidecar Stories big event where I'm doing just a ton of streaming. It seemed like a great opportunity to get Mr. Halfbit in here. I keep gesturing to you this way because that's the direction you are on Discord, but you're down here on Twitch. We'll figure it out, I'm sure. But now, typically what we do during this section is, we say hi to people, welcome in, come on in, folks. Book Fair, says Good Courage. Indeed. You can go ahead and use the Book Fair command or just BF if you want to know what that is all about. I'm sure I'll be talking more about it later. Mr. Halfbit, sorry, this feels very weird to be like doing my whole deal while you're here.
I'm chilling, dude.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
chilling. I'm loving this. So continue.
Now, as a matter of fact, this might be kind of fun because, as some of y'all know, our typical lineup through the week is on Tuesdays, we've got Vintage Sidecar, where we shed some light on classic lit. We do sort of an in-depth discussion about certain works of classical literature. We started with The Great Gatsby. We have done Frankenstein. We recently did The Hobbit. And so it is actually kind of appropriate that we would do a bit of review like we usually do. Typically, I would come in here and every week I'll read a chapter or maybe a couple of chapters, depending on the length of these things. As Tuesdays have brought us through The Hobbit, that means we're actually going to spend some time doing a bit of review today. We're going to review what people remember from The Hobbit. I think I might win on this one because I don't know how long it's been since you last read it, Mr. Halfbit. And then, of course, we've got some folks in chat.
It's been forever. I haven't. What's bad is that the last time I spent time with The Hobbit is the movies,
Gotcha.
which are vastly different.
I was going to ask.
So don't ask me.
Sure.
I know there's a mountain involved.
So I've heard such things. Yes.
I've heard such things.
But if you are wondering what else we do with our week, on Wednesdays we've got our tabletop RPG wing of Sidecar Stories. Side Cannons! Side Cannons, it's a new one. I'm still like, I'm not workshopping it, but I'm still sort of trying to fall into a rhythm with it. It still feels weird. But Side Cannons, we are currently working on some world building, and then Thursdays is Flying Sidecar. That's a voice actor's venture through some stories we all love. We have read through the entirety of the Harry Potter series. Yes, all 1 million plus words live on stream. I read those over the course of 3 years, and that's kind of the thing that got this channel kind of its kickstart. And now we are well into the Percy Jackson series, having a ton of fun. Bitter Bard, I'm glad you're liking Book Fair. Good Courage. I like the enthusiasm. Feels good. All right, Mr. Halfbit, are you ready to talk a little bit of review? We're not going chapter by chapter, but just a little bit of discussion of what we saw in the last book. I would say here's what I'm going to ask, and I know I'm putting you on the spot. This just super casual. Hey, what do you remember from the beginning of The Hobbit? We'll just discuss it in acts, Act 1, 2, and 3.
There's a hobbit and a wizard. Bunch of dwarves come to his house.
We're on the right track so far.
They walk really, really far. bunch of wolves attack. Some orcs and goblins involved. There's a big tree on fire, and they run up in it.
I mean, you're doing pretty well so far, my guy.
How am I doing good? How am I doing?
Your driving is not bad.
Then they eventually get caught by some goblins.
You got one thing switched around, but again, you're doing pretty well so far.
No, they visit the elves.
Yep.
And then they escape in a bunch of barrels.
Okay, and now is when the wheels have come off officially. We just jumped all the way to Act 3. Okay, so late Act 2 to be fair, but no, I think you were right on track with the beginning. Luke Stoltzfus has contributed Act 1, Dwarf Storm, Shanghai Bilbo, which I think is a pretty decent estimation. We begin with Bilbo Baggins. We did a ton of character analysis discussion about Bilbo. This little fellow, this little creature, who is constantly torn between his two sides, the Baggins side and the Took side, the side that wants to be home and wants to be comfortable and wants things to remain the same. And then there's that Took side. It lives in him. He sort of lives with it, sometimes lives a little under it, and it pushes him towards other things, greater things out there in the world. And that thing comes along in the form of a bunch of dwarves who are looking for a burglar, someone with some sneaky skills. If you like D&D, you might think along the lines of like a rogue, because they've got a bunch of, I would say, what do you think? They've got like they have a bard, I think, and then quite a few fighters. Maybe you could even call one or two a cleric. How would you stat out this party? We're not doing full-on characters as characters, but...
Well, there's clearly a wizard.
There is a wizard.
Um,
Yep, we've got Gandalf.
uh, I'd say he's a rogue, and then the rest of them are mainly just like fighters or rangers.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, kind of a
know?
bunch of multi-classers.
Yeah, yeah.
But a bunch of dwarves who are trying to return to their homeland to retake it after it was lost to a dragon. Now, on the way, they encounter quite a few adventures, and over time, Bilbo starts to feel like he has a real. He goes from feeling very much out of place, very much fish out of water, to starting to feel like he might have a place in all of this. He might have some relevant skills that could feasibly apply here. He might be good at this. As they meet the trolls, as they visit the elves, Bilbo is seeing much, much more of the world than he ever thought that he would. And it's going all right for him. He has his moments where he wishes he was back home, but in spite of goblins, in spite of wargs, in spite of meeting a bear man, Beorn, in spite of, as you mentioned, they traipse through a forest and get lost in the trees for a while before being captured by elves and then escaping down the river. And that escape down the river is really Bilbo's big moment. But then we move into Act 3, which is dealing with Smaug the dragon itself. Or at least we think so. We start with the dragon, and then the whole dragon sitch in the books is over relatively quickly. It is a much shorter part of the book than you would think, as you take this whole journey to approach the Lonely Mountain, which is the homeland, the home city underneath this mountain of these dwarves. And then Smaug is there and gone. There and vanquished very quickly. But then it becomes about the conflict, about the greed, about the things that the dragon represented, all of these riches available, and yet sort of ancestral feuds between different groups of people, and people feeling like they were owed things. At the end of the day, Bilbo has been caught up in this wild adventure, helped along by a bunch of dwarves, a little ring in his pocket that he discovers in a cave, a wizard that believes in him maybe more than he believes in himself, and then finally he is helped by his own sense of accomplishment, his own skills. But as much as one of those things seems perhaps unimportant on that list, it's going to turn out to be a lot more important than it sounds at first. But I'm not going to spoil that quite yet. Everybody, I think with that review done, I think we can adequately move into our chapter for the day. Y'all, I would say don't necessarily expect this one to be one of our longest streams. I think it's gonna. You will certainly be satisfied. We're reading just about 10,000 words tonight in this first chapter, and I think you'll be satisfied with that. But we're not necessarily sitting down here to cover the whole first of the 6 books. I know it's 3, but it's also kind of 6. All right, folks, I just want to say hi to a few folks who have joined us. Gems, Neens, hello. Sika, Luke Stoltzfus. Luke, it's good to see you back. I know you've had a lot on your plate. I know a lot of teachers have had a lot on their plate, but it's great to have you back here. Gwen Dog, same thing. And y'all, if you were wondering why we're doing this, why we're doing a full week of all this streaming, go ahead and use the book fair command. But at its heart, this is a week that I really want to say thank you so very much to all my patrons. We have got folks who are supporting Sidecar Stories, helping it to grow. We have got quite a few folks in there now, and if you go ahead and jump in this week, you are going to get some special deals on my very first run of Sidecar Stories merch. I've never done this before. I'm using Patreon. Basically, just choose whichever level makes sense to you, and there is going to be merch on that at that tier. You're just going to automatically get whatever merch is attached to that tier. Now, one thing, part of my learning curve for all this is I don't know. Typically, Patreon sort of like does the ping and registers who all is a patron on the first of the month. Now that's Friday, which means it is possible that in order to get these special patron deals, you will have to be a patron by Friday, on or before Friday. I do not know. I'm going to find out at the same time that you do. But if you're worried about it, if you're a little nervous, and you've got something that you really want to take a look at before it gets bumped up from the absolute bare minimum, like sell myself down the river level up to the recommended wisdom of Patreon level, you're going to want to jump on that probably on or before Thursday. So I don't know. I will find out at the same time that y'all do. But patrons, I'm going to be going through a full list later on today, but we have got some incredibly generous folks who have wanted to see Sidecar Stories grow. And by golly, it has over the 3 approaching 4 years that it has existed. So thank you all so very much. All right. Hey, Halfbit.
What up?
Are you ready to do this thing?
I guess.
Here we go. The very first chapter of Lord of the Rings. A long-expected party. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would be shortly celebrating his 11st birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years, ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return. The riches he had brought back from his travels had now become a local legend, and it was popularly believed, whatever the old folk might say, that the hill at Bag End was full of tunnels, stuffed with treasure. And if that was not enough for fame, there was also his prolonged vigor to marvel at. Time wore on, but it seemed to have little effect on Mr. Baggins. At 90, he was much the same as at 50. At 99, they began to call him well-preserved, but unchanged would have been nearer the mark. There were some that shook their heads and thought this was too much of a good thing. It seemed unfair that anyone should possess apparently perpetual youth, as well as, reputedly, inexhaustible wealth. "It will have to be paid for," they said. "Not natural, and trouble will come of it." But so far, trouble had not come. And as Mr. Baggins was generous with his money, most people were willing to forgive him his oddities and his good fortune. He remained on visiting terms with his relatives, except, of course, the Sackville Bagginses, and he had many devoted admirers among the hobbits of poor and unimportant families. But he had no close friends until some of his younger cousins began to grow up. The eldest of these, and Bilbo's favorite, was young Frodo Baggins. When Bilbo was 99, he adopted Frodo as his heir and brought him to live at Bag End, and the hopes of the Sackville Bagginses were finally dashed. Bilbo and Frodo happened to have the same birthday, September 22nd.
"You had better come and live here, Frodo, my lad.
Said Bilbo one day.
And then we can celebrate our birthday parties comfortably together."
At that time, Frodo was still in his tweens, as the hobbits called the irresponsible 20s between childhood and the coming of age at 33. 12 more years passed. Each year, the Bagginses had given very lively combined birthday parties at Bag End, but now it was understood that something quite exceptional was being planned for that autumn. Bilbo was going to be 111, 111, a rather curious number and a very respectable age for a hobbit. The old Took himself had only reached 130, and Frodo was going to be 33, an important number, the date of his coming of age. Tongues began to wag in Hobbiton and Bywater, and rumor of the coming event traveled all over the Shire. The history and character of Mr. Bilbo Baggins became once again the chief topic of conversation, and the older folk suddenly found their reminiscences in welcome demand. No one had a more attentive audience than old Ham Gamgee, commonly known as the Gaffer. He held forth at the Ivy Bush, a small inn on the Bywater Road, and he spoke with some authority, for he had tended to the garden at Bag End for 40 years, and had helped old Holman in the same job before that. Now that he was himself growing old and stiff in the joints, the job was mainly carried on by his youngest son, Sam Gamgee. Both father and son were on very friendly terms with Bilbo and Frodo. They lived on the hill itself, in number 3 Bagshot Row, just below Bag End. "Very nice, well-spoken, gentle hobbit is Mr. Bilbo, as I've always said," the Gaffer declared. with perfect truth, for Bilbo was very polite to him, calling him Master Hamfast and consulting him constantly upon the growing of vegetables. In the matter of roots, especially potatoes, the gaffer was recognized as the leading authority by all in the neighborhood, including himself.
But what was this Frodo that lives with him?
Said old Noakes of Bywater.
Baggins is his name, but he's more than half a brandybuck, they say. It beats me why any Baggins of Hobbiton should go looking for a wife away there in Buckland where folks are so queer.
No wonder they're queer, put in Daddy Two-Foot, the gaffer's next-door neighbour. If they live on the wrong side of the Brandywine River, they're right to get the old forest. That's a dark, bad place if half the tales be true.
Oh, you're right, Dad, said the gaffer. And not that the Brandybucks of Buckland live in the old forest, but they're a queer breed, seemingly. They fool about with boats on that big river. That isn't natural. Small wonder that trouble came of it, I say. But be that as it may, Mr. Frodo's as nice a young hobbit as you could wish to meet. Very much like Mr. Bilbo, in modern looks. After all, his father was a Baggins. A decent, respectable hobbit was Mr. Drogo Baggins. There was never much to tell of him. Till he was drowned.
Drowned? Said several voices. They had heard this and other darker rumours before, of course, but hobbits have a passion for family history, and they were ready to hear it again.
Well, so they say, said the gaffer. You see, Mr. Drogo, he married poor Miss Primula Brandybuck. She was our Mr. Bilbo's first cousin on the mother's side, her mother being the youngest of the old Took's daughters, and Mr. Drogo was his second cousin. So, Mr. Frodo was his first and second cousin, once removed, either way, as the saying is, if you follow me, and Mr. Drogo was staying at Brandy Hall with his father-in-law. Old Master Gorbodoc, as he often did after his marriage, him being partial to his victuals, and old Gorbodoc keeping a mighty generous table. And he went out boating on the Brandywine River, and he and his wife were drowned. And poor Mr. Frodo, only a child and all.
I've heard they went in the water after dinner in the midnight, said old Noakes, and it was Drogo's weight that sunk the boat.
And I heard she pushed him in, and he pulled her in after him, said Sandyman, the Hobbiton miller.
You shouldn't listen to all you hear, Sandyman, said the gaffer,
who did not much like the miller.
There's no call to go talking of pushing and pulling. Boats are quite tricky enough for those that sit still without looking for further cause of trouble. Anyway, there was this Mr. Frodo, left an orphan and stranded, as you might say, among those queer Bucklanders, being brought up anyhow in Brandy Hall, a regular warren, by all accounts. Old Master Gorbodoc never had fewer than a couple of 100 relations in the place. Mr. Bilbo never did a kinder deed when he brought that bad... Mr. Bilbo never did a kinder deed than when he brought that lad back to live among decent folk. But I reckon it was a nasty shock for those Sackville Bagginses. They thought they were going to get Bag-End. That time when he went off and was thought to be dead, and then he comes back and orders him off, and he goes on living and living and living, never looking a day older, bless him. And finally, suddenly, he produces an heir. He's got all the papers made out proper. The Sackville Bagginses won't never see the inside of Bag-End now. or it's to be hoped not.
There's a tidy bit of money tucked away up there, I hear tell, said a stranger, a visitor on business from Michael Delving in the West Farthing. All the top of your hill's full of tunnels packed with chests of gold and silver and jewels, by what I've heard.
And you've heard more than I can speak to, answered the gaffer. I know nothing about jewels. Mr. Bilbo's free with his money, and there seems to be no lack of it, but I know of no tunnel making. I saw Mr. Bilbo when he came back, matter of 60 years ago, when I was a lad. But I'd not long come prentice to old Holman, him being my dad's cousin. But he had me up at Bag End helping him to keep folks from trampling and trespassing all over the garden while the sale was on. And in the middle of it all, Mr. Bilbo comes up the hill with a pony and some mighty big bags and a couple of chests. I don't doubt they were mostly full of treasure he'd picked up in foreign parts where the mountains be of gold, they say. But there wasn't enough to fill tunnels. But my lad Sam will know more about that. He's in and out of Bag End. Crazy about stories of the old days he is, and he listens to 'em all of Mr. Bilbo's tales. Mr. Bilbo's learned him his letters, meaning no harm, mark you, and I hope no harm will come of it. Elves and dragons, I says to him, cabbages and potatoes are better for you and me. Don't you go getting mixed up in business of your betters, or you'll land in trouble that's too big for you, I says to him. And I might say it to others, he added, with a look at the stranger and the miller. But the gaffer did not convince his audience. The legend of Bilbo's wealth was now too firmly fixed in the minds of younger generations of hobbits.
Oh, but he's likely been adding to what he brought at first, argued the miller, voicing common opinion. He's often away from home. Look at that outlandish folk what visit him. Dwarves coming at night, and that old wandering conjurer, Gandalf, and all. And you can say what you like, Gaffer, but Bag End's a queer place, and its folks are queerer.
And you can say what you like, but about what you know nothing more than you do of boating, Mr. Sandyman, retorted the gaffer, disliking the miller even more than usual. If that's being queer, we could do with a bit more of the queerness in these parts. There's some not far away wouldn't offer a pint of beer to a friend if they lived in a hole with golden walls. Or they do things proper at Bag End. Our Sam says that everyone's going to be invited to the party, and there's going to be presents, mark you, presents for all. This very month, as is.
That very month was September, and as fine as you could ask. A day or two later, a rumor, probably started by the knowledgeable Sam, was spread about that there were going to be fireworks. Fireworks, what is more, such as had not been seen in the Shire for nigh on a century. Not indeed since the old Took had died. Days passed, and the day drew nearer. An odd-looking wagon laden with odd-looking packages rolled into Hobbiton one evening and toiled up the hill to Bag End. The startled hobbits peered out of lamplit doors to gape at it. It was driven by an outlandish folk singing strange songs, dwarves with long beards and deep hoods. A few of them remained at Bag End. At the end of the second week in September, a cart came in through Bywater from the direction of Brandywine Bridge in broad daylight. An old man was driving it all alone. He wore a tall, pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, and a silver scarf. He had a long, white beard and bushy eyebrows that stuck out beyond the brim of his hat. Small hobbit children ran after the cart all through Hobbiton and right up the hill. It had a cargo of fireworks, as they rightly guessed. At Bilbo's front door, the old man began to unload. There were great bundles of fireworks of all sorts and shapes, each labeled with a large red G and the elf rune. That was Gandalf's mark, of course, and the old man was Gandalf the Wizard, whose fame in the Shire was mainly due to his skill with fires, smokes, and lights. His real business was far more difficult and dangerous, but the Shire folk knew nothing about it. To them, he was just one of the attractions at the party, hence the excitement of the hobbit children.
Gee for grand,
they shouted, and the old man smiled. They knew him by sight, though he only appeared in Hobbiton occasionally, and never stopped long. But neither did they, nor any of the oldest of their elders, had seen of his fireworks displays. They now belonged in the legendary past. When the old man, helped by Bilbo and some dwarves, had finished unloading, Bilbo gave a few pennies away, but not a single squib or cracker was forthcoming, to the disappointment of the onlookers.
"Run away now,"
said Gandalf.
"You'll get plenty when time comes."
Then he disappeared inside with Bilbo, and the door was shut. The young hobbit stared at the door in vain for a while, then made off, feeling that the day of the party would never come. Inside Bag End, Bilbo and Gandalf were sitting at the open window of a small room looking out west to the garden. The late afternoon was bright and peaceful. The flowers glowed red and golden. Snapdragons and sunflowers and nasturtiums trailing all over the turf walls and peeping in at the round windows.
"How bright your garden looks,"
said Gandalf.
Yes,
Said Bilbo.
I am very fond indeed of it, and of all the dear old Shire, but I think I need a holiday.
"You mean that you intend to go on with your plan, then?"
I do. I made up my mind months ago, and I haven't changed it.
"Very well. There's no good to say any more. Stick to your plan, and your whole plan, mind. And I hope it will turn out for the best. For you and for all of us."
I hope so. Anyway, I mean to enjoy myself on Thursday and have my little joke.
"Who will laugh, I wonder?"
Said Gandalf, shaking his head.
We shall see.
Said Bilbo. The next day, more carts rolled up the hill, and still more carts. There might have been some grumbling about dealing locally, but that very week, orders began to pour out of Bag End for every kind of provision, commodity, or luxury that could be obtained in Hobbiton or Bywater or anywhere in the neighborhood. People became enthusiastic, and they began to tick off the days on the calendar as they watched eagerly for the postman, hoping for invitations. Before long, the invitations began pouring out, and the Hobbiton post office was blocked, and the Bywater post office was snowed under, and voluntary postmen were called for. There was a constant stream of them going up the hill, carrying hundreds of polite variations on, "Thank you, I shall certainly come." A notice appeared at the end of Bag End, on the gate. "No admittance except on party business." Even those who had, or pretended to have, party business were seldom allowed inside. Bilbo was busy, writing invitations, ticking off answers, picking up presents, and making some private preparations of his own. From the time of Gandalf's arrival, he remained hidden from view. One morning, the hobbits woke to find a large field, south of Bilbo's front door, covered with ropes and poles for tents and pavilions. A special entrance was cut into the bank leading to the road, and wide steps and a large white gate were built there. The 3 hobbit families of Bagshot Row, adjoining field, were intensely interested and generally envied. Old Gaffer Gamgee stopped even pretending to work on his garden. The tents began to go up. There was a specially large pavilion, so big that the tree that grew in the field was right inside it and stood proudly near one end, at the head of the chief table. Lanterns were hung on all of its branches. More promising still, to the hobbit's mind, an enormous open-air kitchen was erected in the north corner of the field. A draught of cooks from every inn and eating house for miles around arrived to supplement the dwarves and their other odd folk that were quartered at Bag End. Excitement rose to its height. Then the weather clouded over. That was on Wednesday, the eve of the party. Anxiety was intense. Then Thursday, September the 22nd, actually dawned. The sun got up, the clouds vanished, flags were unfurled, and the fun began. Bilbo Baggins called it a party, but it was really a variety of entertainments rolled into one. Practically everybody living near was invited. A very few were overlooked by accident, but they still turned up all the same. That did not matter. Many people from other parts of the Shire were also asked, and there were even a few from outside the borders. Bilbo met the guests, and additions, at the new White Gate in person. He gave away presents to all and sundry. The latter were those who went out again by a back way and came in again by the gate. Hobbits give presents to other people on their own birthdays. Not very expensive ones, as a rule, and not so lavishly as on this occasion, but it was not a bad system. Occasionally, in Hobbiton and Bywater, every day in the year it was somebody's birthday, so every hobbit in those parts had a fair chance of at least one present, at least once a week. But they never got tired of them. On this occasion, the presents were unusually good. The Hobbit children were so excited that for a while they almost forgot about eating. There were toys the likes of which they had never seen before, all beautiful and some obviously magical. Some of them had indeed been ordered a year before and had come all the way from the mountain and from Dale, and were of real dwarf make. When every guest had been welcomed and was finally inside the gate, there were songs, dances, music, games, and of course, food and drink. There were 3 official meals: lunch, tea, and dinner, or supper. But lunch and tea were marked chiefly by the fact that at those times all the guests were sitting down and eating together. At other times there were merely lots of people eating and drinking, continuously from 11s until 6:30 when the fireworks started. The fireworks were by Gandalf. They were not only brought by him, but designed and made by him. And the special effects, set pieces, and flights of rockets were let off by him, but there was also a generous distribution of squibs, crackers, bacca-wrappers, sparklers, torches, dwarf candles, elf fountains, goblin barkers, and thunderclaps. They were all superb. The art of Gandalf improved with age. There were rockets, like a flight of scintillating birds singing with sweet voices. There were green trees with trunks of dark smoke. Their leaves opened like a whole spring, unfolding in a moment, and their shining branches dropped glowing flowers upon the astonished hobbits, disappearing with a sweet scent just before they touched their upturned faces. There were fountains of butterflies that flew glittering into the trees. There were pillars of colored fires that rose and turned into eagles, or sailing ships, or a phalanx of flying swans. There was red thunderstorm and showers of golden rain. There was a forest of silver spears that sprang suddenly into the air with a yell like an embattled army, and then came down against the water with a hiss like 100 hot snakes. And there was also one last surprise, in honor of Bilbo, and it startled the hobbits exceedingly, as Gandalf intended. The lights went out. A great smoke went up. It shaped itself like a mountain, seen in the distance, and began to glow at the summit. It spouted green and scarlet flames. Out flew a red golden dragon. Not life-size, but terribly lifelike. Fire came from his jaws. His eyes glared down. There was a roar, and he whizzed 3 times over the heads of the crowd. They all ducked, and many fell flat on their faces. The dragon passed like an express train, turned a somersault, and burst over Bywater with a deafening explosion.
That is the signal for supper,
said Bilbo. The pain and alarm vanished at once, and the prostrate hobbits leapt to their feet. There was a splendid supper for everyone. For everyone, that is, except those invited to the special family dinner party. This was held in the great pavilion with the tree. The invitations were limited to 12 dozen, a number also called by the hobbits 1 gross, though the word was not considered proper use of people. And the guests were selected from all the families to which Bilbo and Frodo were related, with the addition of a few special, unrelated friends, such as Gandalf. Many young hobbits were included, and present by parental permission, for hobbits were easygoing with their children in the matter of sitting up late, especially when there was a chance of getting them a free meal. Bringing up young hobbits took a lot of provender. There were many Bagginses and Boffins, and also many Tooks and Brandybucks. There were various Grubbs, relations of Bilbo Baggins' grandmother, and various Chubbs, connections of his Took grandfather, and a selection of Burrowses, Bulgers, Bracegirdles, Brockhouses, Goodbodies, Hornblowers, and Proudfoots. Some of these were only very distantly connected with Bilbo, and some of them had hardly ever been in Hobbiton before, as they lived in remote corners of the Shire. The Sackville Bagginses were not forgotten. Otho and his wife Lobelia were present. They disliked Bilbo and detested Frodo, but so magnificent was the invitation card, written in golden ink, that they felt it impossible to refuse. Besides, their cousin Bilbo had been specializing in food for many years, and his table had a high reputation. All the 144 guests expected a pleasant feast, though they rather dreaded the after-dinner speech of their host, an inevitable item. He was liable to drag in bits of what he called poetry, and sometimes, after a glass or two, would allude to the absurd adventures of his mysterious journey. The guests were not disappointed. They had a very pleasant feast. In fact, an engrossing entertainment. Rich, abundant, varied, and prolonged. The purchase of provisions fell almost to nothing throughout the district in the ensuing weeks, but as Bilbo's catering had depleted the stocks of most stores, cellars and warehouses for miles around, that did not matter much. After the feasts, more or less, came the speech. Most of the company were, however, now in a tolerant mood, at that delightful stage at which they called filling up the corners. They were sipping their favorite drinks and nibbling at their favorite dainties, and their fears were forgotten. They were prepared to listen to anything and to cheer up at every full stop.
My dear people,
Began Bilbo, rising in his place. "Hear, hear, hear!" they shouted, and kept on repeating it in chorus, seeming reluctant to follow their own advice. Bilbo left his place and went and stood on a chair underneath the illuminated tree. The light of the lanterns fell on his beaming face. The golden buttons shone on his embroidered silk waistcoat. They could all see him standing, waving one hand in the air, and the other was in his trouser pocket.
my dear Bagginsons and Boffins,
He began.
and my dear Tooks and Brandybucks and Grubs and Chubbs and Burrowses and Hornblowers and Bulgers, Bracegirdles, Good Botties, Brockhouses and Proudfoots.
Proud feet!
Shouted an elderly hobbit from the back of the pavilion. His name, of course, was Proudfoot, and well merited. His feet were large, exceptionally furry, and both were on the table.
Proudfoots.
Repeated Bilbo.
Also my good Sackville Bagginses that I welcome back at last to Bag End. Today is my 111th birthday. I am 11 today.
Ah, hooray, hooray! Many happy returns! They shouted, and they hammered joyously on the tables. Bilbo was doing splendidly. This was the sort of stuff they liked, short and obvious.
I hope you're all enjoying yourselves as much as I am.
Deafening cheers, cries of yes and no, noises of trumpets and horns, pipes and flutes and other musical instruments. There were, as had been said, many young hobbits present. Hundreds of musical crackers had been pulled. Most of them bore the mark Dale on them, which did not convey much to most of the hobbits, but they all agreed they were marvelous crackers. They contained instruments, small but of perfect make and enchanting tones. Indeed, in one corner some of the young Tooks and Brandybucks, supposing Uncle Bilbo to have finished, since he had plainly said all that was necessary, now got up an impromptu orchestra and began a merry dance tune. Master Everard Took and Miss Melilot Brandybuck got on a table with bells in their hands and began to dance the Springle Ring, a pretty dance but rather vigorous. But Bilbo had not finished. Seizing a horn from a youngster nearby, he blew 3 loud hoots. The noise subsided.
I shall not keep you long.
He cried. Cheers from all the assembly.
I have called you all together for a purpose.
Something in the way that he said this made an impression. There was almost silence, and 1 or 2 of the Tooks pricked up their ears.
Indeed, for 3 purposes. First of all, to tell you that I am immensely fond of you all, and that 11 years is too short a time to live among such excellent and admirable hobbits.
Tremendous outbursts of approval.
I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve.
This was unexpected and rather difficult. There was some scattered clapping, but most of them were trying to work out to see if it came out to a compliment.
Secondly, to celebrate my birthday.
Cheers
I
again.
should say our birthday, for it is, of course, also the birthday of my heir and nephew, Frodo. He comes of age and into his inheritance today.
Some perfunctory clapping by the elders and some loud shouts of "Frodo! Frodo! Jolly old Frodo!" from the juniors. The Sackville Bagginses scowled and wondered what was meant by coming into his inheritance.
Together we score 144. Your numbers were chosen to fit this remarkable total. One gross, if I may use the expression.
No cheers. This was ridiculous. Many of his guests, and especially the Sackville Bagginses, were insulted, feeling sure they had only been asked in order to fill the required number, like goods in a package.
Oh, one gross indeed vulgar expression.
It is also, if I may be allowed to refer to ancient history, the anniversary of my arrival by barrel at Escaroth on the Long Lake. Though the fact that it was my birthday slipped my memory on that occasion. I was only 51 then, and my birthdays did not seem so important. The banquet was very splendid, however, though I had a bad cold at the time. I remember and could only say, "Thank you very much." I now repeat it more correctly. Thank you very much for coming to my little party.
Obstinate silence. They all feared that a song or some poetry was now imminent and they were getting bored. Why didn't he stop talking and let them drink to his health? But Bilbo did not sing or recite. He paused for a moment.
Thirdly, and finally,
He said.
I wish to make an announcement.
He spoke this last word so loudly and suddenly that everyone sat up who still could.
I regret to announce that, no, as I said, 11 years is far too short a time to spend among you. This is the end. I am going. I am leaving you now. Goodbye!
He stepped down and vanished. There was a blinding flash of light, and all the guests blinked. When they opened their eyes, Bilbo was nowhere to be seen. 144 flabbergasted hobbits sat back, speechless. Old Odo Proudfoot removed his feet from the table and stamped. Then there was a dead silence. Until suddenly, after several deep breaths, every Baggins, Boffin, Took, Brandybuck, Grubb, Chubb, Burrows, Bulger, Bracegirdle, Brockhouse, Goodbody, Hornblower, and Proudfoot began to talk at once. It was generally agreed that the joke was in very bad taste, and more food and drink were needed to cure the guests of shock and annoyance.
He's mad. I always told you so,
was probably the most popular comment. Even the Tooks, with a few exceptions, thought Bilbo's behavior was absurd. For the moment, most of them took it for granted that his disappearance was nothing more than a ridiculous prank. But old Rory Brandybuck was not so sure. Neither age nor an enormous dinner had clouded his wits, and he said to his daughter-in-law Esmeralda,
"There's something fishy in this, my dear. I believe that Mad Baggins is off again. Silly old fool, but why worry? He hasn't taken the victuals with him."
He called loudly to Frodo to send the wine round again. Frodo was the only one present who had said nothing. For some time he had sat silent beside Bilbo's empty chair and ignored all remarks and questions. He had enjoyed the joke, of course, even though he had been in the know. He had difficulty in keeping from laughter at the indignant surprise of the guests, but at the same time, he felt deeply troubled. He realized suddenly that he loved the old hobbit dearly. Most of the guests went on drinking and eating and discussing Bilbo Baggins's oddities, past and present, but the Sackville Bagginses had already departed in wrath. Frodo did not want to have any more to do with the party. He gave orders for more wine to be served, and then got up and drained his own glass silently to the health of Bilbo, and slipped out of the pavilion. As for Bilbo Baggins, even while he was making his speech, he had been fingering the golden ring in his pocket. His magic ring that he had kept secret for so many years. As he stepped down, he slipped it onto his finger, and he was never seen by any hobbit in Hobbiton again. He walked briskly back to his hole and stood for a long moment, listening with a smile to the din in the pavilion and the sounds of merrymaking in other parts of the field. Then he went in. He took off his party clothes, folded them up, and wrapped them in tissue paper with his embroidered silk waistcoat and put it away. Then he put on quickly some old, untidy garments and fastened round his waist a leather-worn belt. On it he hung a short sword in a battered black leather scabbard. From a locked drawer, smelling of mothballs, he took out an old cloak and hood. They had been locked up as if they were very precious, but they were so patched and weather-stained that their original color could hardly be guessed. It might have been dark green. They were rather too large for him. But then he went into his study, and from a large strong box took out a bundle wrapped in old cloths, and a leather-bound manuscript, and also a large, bulky envelope. The book and bundle he stuffed into the top of a heavy bag that was standing there, nearly already full. Into the envelope he slipped his golden ring, and its fine chain, and he sealed it and addressed it to Frodo. At first he put it on the mantelpiece, but suddenly he removed it and stuck it in his pocket. At that moment the door opened, and Gandalf quickly came in.
Hello? I wondered if you'd turn up.
I'm glad to find you visible,
replied the wizard, sitting down in a chair.
I wanted to catch you and have a few final words. I suppose you feel that everything has gone off splendidly, and according to plan.
Yes, I do.
Said Bilbo.
Though that flash was surprising, it quite startled me, let alone the others. A little addition of your own, I suppose.
It was. You have wisely kept that ring secret all these years, and it seemed to me necessary to give your guest something else that would seem to explain your sudden vanishment.
Would spoil my joke. You are an interfering old busybody. But I expect you know best as usual.
I do, when I know anything. But I don't feel too sure about this whole affair. It has now come to the final point. You have had your joke, and alarmed or offended most of your relations, and given the whole Shire something to talk about for 9 days or 99 more, likely. Are you going any further?
Yes, I am. I feel I need a holiday. A very long holiday, as I have told you before. Probably a permanent holiday. I don't expect I shall return. In fact, I don't mean to, and I have made all arrangements. I am old, Gandalf. I don't look it, but I am beginning to feel it in my heart of hearts. Well preserved, indeed. Why, I feel all thin, sort of stretched, if you know what I mean, like butter that has been scraped over too much bread. That can't be right. I need a change or something.
Gandalf looked curiously and closely at him.
No, it does not seem right,
he said thoughtfully.
No, after all, I believe your plan is probably the best.
Well, I've made up my mind. Anyway, I want to see mountains again, Gandalf. Mountains, and then find somewhere where I can rest. And peace and quiet, without a lot of relatives prying around and a string of confounded visitors hanging on the bell. Might find somewhere where I can finish my book. I have thought of a nice ending for it. And he lived happily ever after, to the end of his days.
I hope he will. That nobody will read the book, however it ends.
Oh, they may, in years to come. Frodo has read some already, as far as it has gone. You'll keep an eye on Frodo, won't you?
Yes, I will. 2 eyes, as often as I can spare them.
He would come with me of course, if I asked him. In fact, he offered to once just before the party. He does not really want to yet. I want to see the wild country again before I die, and the mountains, but he is still in love with the Shire, with woods and fields and little rivers. He ought to be comfortable here. I am leaving everything to him. Of course, except for a few oddments. I hope he will be happy when he gets used to being on his own. It's time he was his own master now.
Everything, said Gandalf. The ring as well. You agreed to that, you remember?
Well, yes, I suppose so.
stammered Bilbo.
Where is it?
In an envelope, if you must know.
Said Bilbo impatiently.
There on the mantelpiece. No, here it is in my pocket.
He hesitated.
Isn't that odd now?
He said softly to himself.
Yet after all, why not? Why shouldn't it stay there?
Gandalf looked again very hard at Bilbo, and there was a gleam in his eyes.
I think, Bilbo,
He said quietly.
I should leave it behind. Don't you want to?
Well, yes. And no. Now it comes to it, I don't like parting with it at all, I may say. And I don't really see why I should. Why do you want me to?
He asked, and a curious change came over his voice. It was sharp with suspicion and annoyance.
You are always badgering me about my ring, but you have never bothered me about the other things that I got on my journey.
No, but I had to badger you, said Gandalf. I wanted the truth. It was important. Magic rings are, well, magical, and they are rare and curious. I was professionally interested in your ring, you might say, and I still am. I should like to know where it is, if you go wandering again. I also think that you have had it quite long enough. You won't need it any more, Bilbo, unless I am much mistaken.
Bilbo flushed, and there was an angry light in his eyes. His kindly face grew hard.
I'm not!
He cried.
And what business is it of yours, anyway, to know what I do with mine own things? It is my own. I found it. It came to me.
Yes, said Gandalf, but there is no need to get angry.
If I am, it is your fault.
Said Bilbo.
It is mine, I tell you. My own. My precious. Yes, my precious.
The wizard's face remained grave and attentive, and only a flicker in his deep eyes showed that he was startled and indeed alarmed.
It has been called that before,
he said,
but not by you.
I say it now. And why not? Even if Gollum said the same once, it's not his now, but mine. And I shall keep it, I say.
Gandalf stood up. He spoke sternly.
You will be a fool if you do, Bilbo,
He said.
You make that clearer with every word that you say. It has got far too much hold on you. Let it go. Then you can go yourself and be free.
I'll do as I choose and go as I please,
said Bilbo obstinately.
Now, my dear hobbit, said Gandalf. All your life we have been friends, and you owe me something. Come, do as you promised. Give it up.
Well, if you want my ring yourself, say so.
Cried Bilbo.
But you won't get it. I won't give my precious away, I tell you.
His hand strayed to the hilt of his small sword. Gandalf's eyes flashed.
It will be my turn to get angry soon,
he said.
And if you say that again, I shall. Then you will see Gandalf the Grey uncloaked.
He took a step toward the hobbit, and he seemed to grow tall and menacing. His shadow filled the little room. Bilbo backed away to the wall, breathing hard, his hand clutching at his pocket. They stood for a while, facing one another, and the air of the room tingled. Gandalf's eyes remained bent on the hobbit. Slowly, his hands relaxed, and he began to tremble.
I don't know what has come over you, Gandalf,
he said.
You have never been like this before. What is it all about? It is mine, isn't it? I found it. Gollum would have killed me if I hadn't kept it. I'm not a thief, whatever he said.
I have never called you one, Gandalf answered. And I am not one either. I am not trying to rob you, but to help you. I wish you would trust me, as you used.
He turned away, and the shadow passed. He seemed to dwindle again to an old man, bent and troubled. Bilbo drew his hand over his eyes.
I am sorry,
he said.
I felt so queer. And yet it would be a relief, in a way, not to be bothered with it anymore. It has been so growing on my mind lately. Sometimes I have felt it was like an eye looking at me. And I am always wanting to put it on and disappear, don't you know, or wondering if it is safe and pulling it out to make sure. I tried locking it up, but I found I couldn't rest without it in my pocket. I don't know why. But I don't seem to be able to make up my mind.
Then trust mine, said Gandalf. It is quite made up. Go away and leave it behind. Stop possessing it. Give it to Frodo, and I will look after him.
Bilbo stood for a moment, tense and undecided. Presently he sighed.
All right,
he said with an effort.
I will.
Then he shrugged his shoulders and smiled rather ruefully.
After all, that's what this party business was all about, really. To give away lots of birthday presents and somehow make it easier to give it away at the same time. It hasn't made it any easier in the end, but it would be a pity to waste all my preparations. It would quite spoil the joke.
Indeed, it would take away the only point I ever saw in the affair,
said Gandalf.
Very well,
said Bilbo.
It goes to Frodo, with all the rest.
He drew in a deep breath.
And now, I really must be starting, or somebody else will catch me. I have said goodbye, and I couldn't bear to do it all over again.
He picked up his bag and moved to the door.
You have still got the ring in your pocket,
said the wizard.
So I have.
Cried Bilbo.
And my will and all the other documents, too. You had better take it and deliver it for me. That will be the safest.
No, don't give the ring to me, said Gandalf. Put it on the mantelpiece. It will be safe enough there till Frodo comes. I shall wait for him.
Bilbo took out the envelope, but just as he was about to set it by the clock, his hand jerked back and the packet fell on the floor. Before he could pick it up, the wizard stooped and seized it and set it in its place. A spasm of anger passed swiftly over the hobbit's face again. Suddenly, it gave way to a look of relief and a laugh.
Well, that's that.
He said.
Now I'm off.
They went out into the hall. Bilbo chose his favorite stick from the stand. Then he whistled. 3 dwarves came out of different rooms where they had been busy.
Is everything ready?
Asked Bilbo.
Everything packed and labeled?
Everything!
They answered.
Well, then let's start.
He stepped out of the front door. It was a fine night, and the black sky was dotted with stars. He looked up, sniffing the air.
Fun. What fun to be off again, off on the road with dwarves. This is what I've been really longing for years. Goodbye,
He said, looking at his old home and bowing to the door.
Hi, Gandalf.
Goodbye for the present, Bilbo. Take care of yourself. You are old enough, and perhaps wise enough.
Take care. I don't care. Don't you worry about me. I am as happy now as I have ever been, and that is saying a great deal. The time has come. I am being swept off my feet at last.
He added, and then in a low voice, as if to himself, he sang softly in the dark.
The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with eager feet until it joins some larger way where many paths and errands meet. And whither then, I cannot say.
He paused, silent for a moment, and then without another word he turned away from the lights and voices in the fields and tents, and followed by his 3 companions went round into his garden, and trotted down the long sloping path. He jumped over a low place at the hedge at the bottom, and took to the meadows, passing into the night like a rustle of wind in the grass. Gandalf remained for a while, staring after him into the darkness.
Goodbye, my dear Bilbo. Until our next meeting,
he said softly, and went back indoors. Frodo came in soon afterward and found him sitting in the dark, deep in thought. "Has he gone?" he asked.
Yes,
Answered Gandalf.
he has gone at last.
I hoped until this evening that it was only a joke," said Frodo. "But I knew in my heart that he really meant to go. He always used to joke about serious things. I wish I'd come back sooner, just to see him off."
I think, really, he preferred slipping off quietly in the end,
said Gandalf.
"Don't be too troubled. He'll be all right now. He left a packet for you. There it is."
Frodo took the envelope from the mantelpiece and glanced at it, but did not open it.
"You'll find his will and all the other documents in there, I think,"
said the wizard.
"You are the master of Bag End now. And also, I fancy, you'll find a golden ring."
"The ring?" exclaimed Frodo.
Has he left me that? I wonder why. Still, it may be useful.
It may, and it may not,
said Gandalf.
I should not make use of it, if I were you, but keep it secret, and keep it safe. Now I'm going to bed.
As Master of Bag End, Frodo felt it his painful duty to say goodbye to the guests. Rumors of strange events had now spread all over the field, but Frodo would only say, no doubt everything will be cleared up by morning. About midnight, carriages came for the important folk. One by one they rolled away, filled with full but very unsatisfied hobbits. Gardeners came by arrangement and removed in wheelbarrows those that had inadvertently remained behind. Night slowly passed. The sun rose. The hobbits rose rather later. Morning went on. People came and began, by orders, to clear away the pavilions and the tables and chairs and the spoons and knives and bottles and plates and the lanterns and the flowering shrubs in boxes and the crumbs and cracker paper and forgotten bags and gloves and handkerchief and the uneaten food, a very small item. Then a number of other people came, without orders. Bagginses and Boffins and Bolgers and Tooks and other guests that lived or were staying near. By midday, when even the best fed were out and about again, there was a large crowd at Bag End. Uninvited, but not unexpected. Frodo was waiting on the step, smiling but looking rather tired and worried. He welcomed all callers, but he did not have much more to say than before. His reply to all inquiries was simply,
Mr. Bilbo Baggins has gone away. As far as I know, for good.
Some of the visitors he invited to come inside, as Bilbo had left messages for them. Inside in the hall there was piled a large assortment of packages and parcels and small articles of furniture. On every item there was a label tied. There were several labels of this sort.
For Adelard took, for his very own, from Bilbo.
On an umbrella. Adelard had carried off many unlabeled ones.
For Dora Baggins, in memory of a long correspondence with love from Bilbo.
On a large wastepaper basket. Dora was Drogo's sister and the eldest surviving female relative of Bilbo and Frodo. She was 91, and she had written reams of good advice for more than half a century.
For Milo Burrows, hoping it will be useful, from BB.
On a gold pen and ink bottle. Milo never answered letters.
For Angelica's use, from Uncle Bilbo.
On a round convex mirror. She was a young Baggins and too obviously considered her face shapely.
For the collection of Hugo Bracegirdle, from a contributor.
On an empty bookcase. Hugo was a great borrower of books and worse than usual at returning them.
For Lobelia Sackville Baggins, as a present.
On a case of silver spoons. Bilbo believed that she had acquired a good many of his spoons while he was away on his former journey. Lobelia knew that quite well. When she arrived later that day, she took the point at once, but she also took the spoons. This is only a small selection of the assembled presents. Bilbo's residence had got rather cluttered up with things in the course of his long life. It was a tendency of hobbit holes to get cluttered up, for which the custom of giving away so many birthday presents was largely responsible. Not, of course, that the birthday presents were always new. There were one or two old mathams of forgotten uses that had circulated all round the district, but Bilbo had usually given new presents, and kept those that he received. The old hole was now being cleared a little. Every one of the various parting gifts had labels, written out personally by Bilbo, and several had some point or some joke. But of course, most of the things that were given where they would be wanted and welcome. The poorer hobbits, and especially those of Bagshot Row, did very well. Old Gaffer Gamgee got 2 sacks of potatoes, a new spade, a woolen waistcoat, and a bottle of ointment for creaking joints. Old Rory Brandybuck, in return for much hospitality, got 12 bottles of old Wynyards, strong red wine from the South Farthing, and now quite mature as it had been laid down by Bilbo's father. Rory quite forgave Bilbo and voted him a capital fellow after the first bottle. There was plenty of everything left for Frodo. And of course, all the chief treasures, as well as the books, pictures, and more than enough furniture, were left in his possession. There was, however, no sign or mention of money or jewelry. Not a penny piece or a glass bead was given away. Frodo had a very trying time that afternoon. A false rumor that the whole household was being distributed free spread like wildfire, and before long the place was packed with people who had no business there but could not be kept out. Labels got torn off and mixed, and quarrels broke out. Some people tried to do swaps and deals in the hall, and others tried to make off with minor items not addressed to them, or with anything that seemed unwatched or unwanted. The road to the gate was blocked with barrows and handcarts. In the middle of all the commotion, the Sackville Bagginses arrived. Frodo had retired for a while and left his friend Merry Brandybuck to keep an eye on things. When Otho loudly demanded to see Frodo, Merry bowed politely.
"He's indisposed," he said. "He's resting."
Hiding, you mean?
Said Lobelia.
Anyway, we want to see him, and we mean to see him. Just go and tell him so.
Merry left them in the hall for a long time, and they had time to discover their parting gift of spoons. It did not improve their tempers. Eventually, they were shown into the study. Frodo was sitting at a table with a lot of papers in front of him. He looked indisposed, to see Sackville Bagginses at any rate, and he stood up, fidgeting with something in his pocket. But he spoke quite politely. The Sackville Bagginses were rather offensive. They began by offering him bad bargain prices, as between friends, for various valuable and unlabeled things. When Frodo replied that the only things specially directed by Bilbo were going to be given away, they said that the whole affair was very fishy.
"One thing is clear, and one thing only,"
said Otho.
"That is that you are doing exceedingly well out of all of it. I insist on seeing the will."
Otho would have been Bilbo's heir but for the adoption of Frodo. He read the will carefully and snorted. It was unfortunately very clear and correct according to the legal customs of hobbits, which demanded, among other things, 7 signatures of witnesses in red ink.
"Foiled again,"
he said to his wife.
"and after waiting 60 years. Spoons, fiddlesticks!"
He snapped his fingers under Frodo's nose and slumped off. But Lobelia was not so easily got rid of. A little while later, Frodo came out of the study to see how things were going on and found her still about the place, investigating nooks and corners and tapping on the floors. He escorted her firmly off the premises, and after he had relieved her of several small, but rather valuable, items that had somehow fallen inside her umbrella. Her face looked as though she were in the throes of thinking out a really crushing parting remark, but all she found to say, turning around on the step, was,
"You'll live to regret it, young fellow. Why don't you go too? You don't belong here. You're no Baggins. You're a Brandybuck."
"You hear that, Merry? That was an insult, if you like," said Frodo as he shut the door on her.
"It was a compliment," said Merry Brandybuck. "And so, of course, not true."
Then they went round the hole and evicted 3 young hobbits, 2 Buffins and a Bolger, who were knocking holes in the walls of one of the cellars. Frodo had a tussle with a young Sancho Proudfoot, old Odo Proudfoot's grandson, who had begun an excavation in a larger pantry, where he thought there was an echo. The legend of Bilbo's gold excited both curiosity and hope, for legendary gold, mysteriously obtained, if not positively ill-gotten, is, as everyone knows, anyone's for the finding, unless the search is interrupted. When he had overcome Sancho and pushed him out, Frodo collapsed into a chair in the hall. "It's time to close the shop, Merry," he said. "Lock the door and don't open it again today, not even if they bring a battering ram." He went to revive himself with a belated cup of tea. He had hardly sat down when there came a soft knocking at the front door. Lobelia again. Most likely, he thought. She might have thought of something really nasty and come back to say it. It can wait. He went on with his tea. The knock was repeated, much louder, but he took no notice. Suddenly, the wizard's head appeared at the window.
If you do not let me in, Frodo, I shall blow down your door right into the hole and out through the hill,
he said.
Oh, my dear Gandalf, half a minute,
cried Frodo, running out of the room to the door.
Come in, I thought it was Lobelia.
Then I forgive you. But I saw her some time ago driving the pony trap toward Bywater with a face that would have curdled new milk.
She already nearly curdled me. Honestly, I nearly tried on Bilbo's ring. I longed to disappear.
Don't do that,
said Gandalf, sitting down.
Do be careful of that ring, Frodo. In fact, it is partly about that I have come to say a last word.
Well, what about it?
What do you know already?
Only what Bilbo told me. I've heard his story, how he found it, and how he used it. On his journey, I mean.
Which story, I wonder?
Said Gandalf.
Oh, not what he told the dwarves and put in his book,
said Frodo.
He told me the true story. Soon after I came to live here, he said that you had pestered him till he told you, so I would better know too. No secrets between us, Frodo, he said. But they're not going any further. It's mine anyway.
That is interesting,
said Gandalf.
Well, what did you think of it all?
If you mean inventing all that about a present, I thought the true story was much more likely, and I couldn't see the point of altering it at all. It was very unlike Bilbo to do so anyway, and I thought of it rather odd.
So did I, but odd things may happen to people who have such treasures if they use them. Let it be a warning to you to be very careful with it. It may have other powers more than just making you vanish when you wish to.
I don't understand,
said Frodo.
Neither do I, answered the wizard. I've merely begun to wonder about the ring, especially since last night. No need to worry, but if you take my advice, you will use it very seldom, or not at all. At least I beg you do not use it in a way that will cause talk or rouse suspicion. I say again, keep it safe, and keep it secret.
You are very mysterious. What are you afraid of?
I'm not certain, so I will not say more. I may be able to tell you something when I come back. I am going off at once, so this is goodbye for the present.
He got up.
At once?
Cried Frodo.
Why, I thought you were staying on for at least a week. I was looking forward to your help.
I did mean to, but I have had to change my mind. I may be away for a good while, but I will come and see you again as soon as I can. Expect me when you see me. I shall slip in quietly. I shan't often be visiting the Shire openly again. I find I have become rather unpopular. They say I am a nuisance and a disturber of the peace. Some people are actually accusing me of spiriting Bilbo away, or worse. If you want to know, there is supposed to be a plot between you and me to get a hold of his wealth.
Some people?
Exclaimed Frodo.
You mean Otho and Lobelia? How abominable. I should give them Bag End and everything else if I could get Bilbo back and go chumping off into the country with him. I love the Shire. But I begin to wish somehow that I had gone too. I wonder if I shall ever see him again.
So do I,
said Gandalf.
And I wonder many other things. Goodbye now. Take care of yourself. Look out for me, especially at unlikely times. Goodbye.
Frodo saw him to the door. He gave a final wave of his hand and walked off at a surprising pace, but Frodo thought the old wizard looked unusually bent, almost as if he were carrying a great weight. The evening was closing in, and his cloaked figure quickly vanished into the twilight. Frodo did not see him again for a long time. And that is the end. That is the end! We've done it, by golly! At long last! we embark into the beginning of this book. Now, folks, I want to say thank you very, very much for joining me. But, of course, thank you to Mr. Halfbit, who has joined me for this very special episode.
Well, thank you, honestly, for having me, because this was, honestly, a ton of fun.
It was so good. It went so well.
Thank you. I just was like, this is... To read this with you is just a blast. So... Thank you to Sam, and thank you for all of y'all for being here, because this is awesome.
It went really, really well. I have not done this sort of reading one-on-one with somebody before, and so I was super excited for the opportunity. Like I said, I knew there is no better person to do Bilbo Baggins. Or indeed, I think you'd make a great Frodo as well, but, like, Bilbo Baggins, there was this moment where we were going to have this character we had gotten to know for a while, and then I knew if I wanted someone to perform that part, it was gonna be you. So I was anxious about it, but I think it went really, really well.
I only talked over you just like slightly,
just maybe a couple of times, and it'll be easy to edit.
I think we did pretty good.
It'll be great. Gems, thank you very much. Jade is super stoked about it. Gwen Dog, Missy says more, and that's the thing, is that this story reads a little bit more slowly. So we cleared about 10,000 words tonight, a little less than that. During that reading week, we cleared about 10,000 words. But it is a lot of prep. It's tough to get into. Bitterbard, yeah, 10,000 words. Whoa, indeed. Somewhere between 9 and 10. And yeah, it's a lot. It can be a lot. I typically hit about 12,000 in a night. For my typical streams, but y'all, Luis the Goat Lady, I'm seeing you very excited. Orly Rose says, Mr. Halfbit legit caused me to tear up, and I think that's what I was hoping for. I knew Halfbit could handle it. Did so good. Hey, Archer Kid, thank you very, very much. Archer Kid says, any soup? That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Carefully with those plates. I've heard that before. What is that from? That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Oh, that's right. It's one of the very first songs that the dwarves sort of sing at Bilbo when they pile into his hobbit hole uninvited. Orly Rose, hey, thank you for the bits. I appreciate you. Now, folks, Mr. Halfbit, I beg your indulgence for a moment while I do a quick recap talking about, or a quick sort of overview talking about Patreon, and then we're going to talk about this chapter that we just read for a bit.
Sure, yeah.
You are, of course. I think I am probably going to be on for another hour at least, but you are invited to be here for whatever portion of that you wish.
I definitely want to talk about this chapter, because heck yeah.
Yes. Okay. Now, folks, I want to say thank you very much. Part of the reason why this week, and therefore this stream, is possible is by the generosity that I've had from all of y'all. Orly Rose, I'm seeing you over there with the bits here on Discord. I have seen subscriptions. Y'all, thank you a ton. I really, really appreciate everyone who has contributed to the channel via Twitch. And the thing about Twitch is that it is fantastic. It lets y'all sort of support the channel in cool ways. But what it doesn't allow me to do very well is plan. When I've got a big hot month on Twitch, that is fantastic, and I use that to invest in the channel. I have got a new webcam here that is going to be basically, it's we're talking like $80. We're not talking, I didn't go out and spend $300 on this thing, but it's kind of the next thing, the only thing I will need until I upgrade, like at some point in the future, to like camcorder, like that style of stuff. We're talking Critical Role stuff right there, but I use that to invest in the channel, but it doesn't allow me to plan for the future in the same way that Patreon does. Patreon is a fantastic opportunity. It's a fantastic platform run by people that I trust more than just about any company that I know of. It can be tough to trust companies, and I really like what Patreon does. They take a much, much smaller cut. The default is like 8 or 9%, and I can choose to increase that if I want to take advantage of more of their services. Whereas on Twitch, any subscription that comes in, Twitch is taking half of that, 50% versus 8%. Hopefully that math makes sense. But at the end of the day, the big thing that Patreon does is it lets me plan. If I know what is coming in a month, then that means that I can plan for the future. And part of those plans include like new streams, for instance. If I'm going to dedicate time to a new stream, Patreon is the thing that sort of signals, hey, you can support that right now. This is a moment in your life when you can actually make that happen. And so if you want to find out what we are doing, of course, we have got the BF command in chat. That will take you over to patreon.com/sidecar stories. We've had a great run already. This is Book Fair, and this is the big time of year that I'm going to be talking about Patreon, and then I'm kind of going to be quieter about it for the rest of the year. I will mention it occasionally, but this is a big push where we can do a lot of things, and I can talk a lot about Patreon, what it is and what it can do for both of us. I have got a couple of different tiers in there that you can go ahead and check out heading over there. Some of it is special Discord roles, so you can be A, marked as a patron, and B, you can get access to the special patrons library channels. You can get access to the archive channels, all the old ones. So for instance, The Hobbit is probably going back in the archives. This channel probably will, and you can get access to that. And that's at the very, very lowest tier of all. If you jump up a little bit, then you can get some of the edits that I pull out of these streams. You can get some behind-the-scenes shots. Like I've got one of my old setup back in the other room, but now that I'm in this office, you're going to be very soon getting a behind-the-scenes tour of the Chop Shop, as I'm calling it, here in my office. Behind-the-scenes stuff. At the next highest level, you can get sneak peeks at new projects. I have got a scripted podcast that I'm working on that I have never done before. It is sort of a meditative tour of my bookshelf. And then as we get up to the higher tiers, we talk about ones that have actually been requested by people, saying, "Hey, I would love to throw more support, but I can't do it at these levels." So hey, keep that number moving up. And I want to thank you all so much for all of that. I'm trying a new thing called Sound Bites. This is going to be on there as long as I can keep it feasible. Sound Bites, you may have seen, like, I think there's a guy called Big Man John who does this. There's one guy who I'm sure you've seen in like a lab coat saying some absolutely mental stuff. Basically, he's like a guy on Fiverr who people will like give him some lines to say and he will say them. I'm a voice actor. Y'all can be voice directors. Whatever your word limit is, you can send me once a month a script that you want me to read. Your word limit is by the tier. You'll see them all marked out in there. But essentially, like whatever dollar amount in US dollars, just add 2 zeros to the end of that. So if you're at the $25 tier, you can send me a 2,500 word script every month, and I will read that. You can give me directions. You can give me voices to work with, and that is true for all the different tiers. Once again, if it goes nuts and I've got limited time, I might have to back off on that. But right now, it's all in there, and I'll do all of them. In addition, we have got my very first experiment with merch. There is Sidecar Stories merch, with a ton of it with artwork from Holly Rose, which is fantastic. It's adorable. It's Chibi Sam juggling beans, and you got to check it out right now. There's a post over there on Discord. You can use the merch command. Merch. And one thing I want to make clear, there's a post over there in that link that's just popped up that will sort of explain to you how it works on Patreon. This is not a merch store. I want you to just go to Patreon, and if you would like to join as a patron, select whatever level makes sense for you, and you will just automatically get whatever merch is attached to that one. This is not, you don't go in there to purchase it, you just select whatever level makes sense, and you're just going to automatically get it after 3 completed months of patronage. That's kind of the Patreon system. Finally, the very last thing I want to do here is I want to thank the folks who have jumped on as patrons, because y'all are absolutely incredible. We have had, Book Fair it's going great, y'all. We have got up at the very top level, holy crap, we had another one join in. So currently the very top level is $50 a month, which is so wild to me that anyone would jump in there and do that, because I want to admit to you all, I don't know if I make anything worth $50 a month, but I had a $25 tier and people requested, hey, can you please make a higher one so I can do a higher level. And right now we've got Dahlia, who is like the first responder. Dahlia is the master librarian and super friend and ally of the channel. Dahlia, up there at the shocking sequel level, and Jade Dragon has joined today. That must have been like the last half hour or so, because that is incredible. Jade Dragon and Dahlia, thank you both so very much. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's amazing.
It's ridiculous.
But you are worth $50. You are worth
Oh,
more than that.
thank you, Half-Bit. Over at the next highest level, we have got the Novel Nouveaux. We've got Deb, who is Escar Lovett. Thank you a ton. Luis, thank you so much. And Sander, of course, thank you for being a patron in addition to all of the other things that you do for this channel. It's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, but Dahlia, I think y'all have seen Dahlia's face around plenty in the Discord, and Sanders you might not have seen as much, but they are both doing just massive stuff for this. Both of them are like maximum effort for Sidecar Stories. Sparkle Lovegood, at the next highest tier are chapter champions, Good Courage, Daniel, Gems, Vicky, Allied, no, I said it again, Allie D, Marin Vare, Orly Rose, and E. By the way, you know who E is. We play D&D with E, Half-Bit, if you just want to,
okay.
yeah. Who, by the way, was, I will repeat to you all, mortified I had never heard the song Losing My Religion. We've got a new friend, Lucy, little Lucy, hello. Dan, Amy, Neens, and Holly, and then of course, down at the bold bookmark tier, my mighty little warriors, Reed, Sing Se, Samya, Sapphire Lady, Stationary Fork, and Kim Hauser. Y'all are absolutely mind-blowing that you would look at what the screwball nonsense we do here and say, yeah, give me a piece of that action. So Lucy is new. I want to say thank you very much for jumping in. And then Jade, who went from chapter champion all the way up to shocking sequel, all the way to the top. Jade, thank you a ton. And then, of course, Marin Vare, who also upgraded, looks like today. So everybody, thank you so very much. Y'all are absolutely bogus incredible. All right? I want you to know that. I want you to know that. And I want you to internalize that. And JCA over in Discord is wondering, where are the merch pictures? You can find those on Patreon. As a matter of fact, y'all can find a bunch of stuff on Patreon because, hey, it's book fair. And the thing that means is that all the stuff that was patrons only, because this is how I want to operate, I want to make things that patrons can get early, but eventually everything goes out to non-patrons. My patrons are partners to help me make things. And so now it's book fair, which means all the stuff we've stocked up over my time on Patreon is now being released fully to the public. You do not need to subscribe. You can see it over there, but you'll want to head to Patreon regardless. And I think Patreon, think of it as like a fun place to be more than just like a place to sub in a special way, right? This isn't like coffee or like buy me a coffee, whatever. This is a spot where I've got stuff. There's cool stuff to go check out. So go check it out. It's all available now. And then as of this book fair, we're going to start building more stuff up toward next book fair. That will be available for patrons early. And then come next year, next book fair, we are going to open it up once again to everyone, even people who are not subscribed on Patreon. So there we go. And now, Mr. Half-Bit, are you ready to talk about this chapter? All right, folks, as per usual, I want to hear what y'all think. I want to hear what y'all have to say. I want to hear what y'all are thinking about this. So if you've got any questions, if you've got any things that you really enjoyed about the story that we read, etc., I want to see it in chat. And of course, Dahlia says, tomorrow is the anniversary of Sam getting his first patron. Dahlia. it was Dahlia. Spoiler alert, everyone. But yes, tomorrow is the 1-year anniversary. I didn't even realize I'd been on Patreon that long because I spent a lot of time just sort of like sitting on the username without actually using it yet. But yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Jade says it was well worth it, and I appreciate that a ton. Marin Vare says, will next book fair be this same time next year? I would say similar. This is like the right season, but I don't know precisely. Okay. There we go. Everybody, let's talk about this thing. Now, Mr. Half-Bit, what would you say is the thing that really drew you in when you first encountered, not necessarily The Hobbit, but The Lord of the Rings specifically, Fellowship of the Ring? What was the thing that grabbed you most when you first encountered this chapter? I know it was a while ago, so it might be a deep cut.
I honestly, like, he does a really good job of filling it with of placing you in Hobbiton. and the all the different characters that are talking about him, and I don't think we get a ton of that in The Hobbit, do we?
Not quite as much. We definitely get sort of descriptions of things, but one of the things that Tolkien was really known for is like his word choice, his diction. We talked about that during The Hobbit, and he definitely played around with that. But you are absolutely right. A lot of the descriptions of food and the sort of locations, you really feel like you can smell the place.
Yeah, and I think like all of the different characters, like because that the beginning where all these people are talking. Like the Gaffer and Samwise and all these people are talking about Bilbo before we actually get to meet old Bilbo, and then all of the different descriptions of everything just is like, it's just really good. And that's a very nondescript descriptor, but
no, it's fantastic. You're right. It's comforting and it's cozy.
Yeah.
And as you go in, I mean, it's a great combination of not just like. Not just a matter of getting you sort of the feel of Hobbiton in general, right? You do definitely feel like you're there, but it's also a little bit of that, like, you know how a lot of days TV shows will have something like a cold open, something along the lines of that first 5 minutes before the first title sequence, you get that crazy nuts thing that happens, or the like super creepy sort of like interesting shots, or you hear a rumor or something. That's exactly what this is. It's like just a few pages at the beginning, which is like, hey, you're about to get in some crazy nonsense, so buckle up your butts.
Sure.
We're about to deal with the strangest lad in all of Hobbiton. But yeah, it's fantastic, and yeah, that's one of the things that Tolkien was really known for, was his diction, the words that he chose. He had a big thing about, there's this discussion about the word cellar door versus the word sky. And how the word cellar door... There's also a very funny Monty Python skit. If you look up, like, woody words versus tinny words,
yes, I've seen that. It's grand.
Very woody sort of word.
But yes, it is this same sort of idea. Yes, Bitterbard, Woody and Tinny, which sounds like a comedy duo from the 40s. But the... Okay, so now I've got some ideas. Which one of us is going to be Woody? Which one of us is going to be Tinny?
I don't know.
We'll figure it out later, I'm sure. But yeah, this idea of like cellar door just rings in a more cozy way. Sky rings in kind of a sharper, less comforting way. And you really see the ways in which Tolkien just at the upper levels was very intentional about language, but at the very foundational levels just loved languages. Halfbit, I assume you are familiar with the fact that Tolkien was a linguist. You know this, I assume.
No clue. Yes, of course.
We've talked about this before, but honestly, we've never talked about it like this, so I'm probably going to be like mentioning things you've already very familiar with.
Fine.
You are also familiar, then, I assume, with the fact that he created a lot of his own languages.
Yep.
Did you ever dig into those in like the back of the book and like try to understand like how Dwarvish was functional?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And you know, growing up, I like after I read the books, you know, as a kid, mind blown that this is a real language?
Yeah.
You know, that's mind blowing. And
a speakable language.
Yeah. And I definitely, after seeing it in the movies, watching these actors speak it, you know, I went and tried to like decipher how to speak this language, and of course, no clue. But it
felt right. Yeah, it feels right.
Yeah.
And hearing it spoken, it's not like so many fictional languages where you see them spoken on screen and you're like, I got you. I see what you did there. That's not real. Yeah. I know that's not real.
Yeah.
Unlike that, I think it was some combination of Tolkien's original work, also a lot of work, I'm sure, on the parts of the actors and direction and such, but when it's spoken on screen, that language feels very lived in. It doesn't feel fake and like it was created a few months ago in a writer's room somewhere.
100% agree with you. And I'm trying not to talk about the movies too much because I relate the movie. I read the books and watched the movies like simultaneously, so they're very close together to me. But the realness of both these books and the movies, but mainly the realness of these books and what he achieved in making them feel real is why they ring so powerful to me. And all these little tiny details that he throws in constantly, and I mean, creating an entire language is like, you can't get realer than that.
Yep.
So
he built it. I mean, he made this world real, and not just like descriptive, but real and genuine. There is a whole language in all the ways that he seemingly could have on the page. Orly Rose says he's so evocative, builds up mood and atmosphere and environment. Yeah, you can really get the sense of Hobbiton where you're at, and that, I would say, is something that improved dramatically since The Hobbit. We spent a decent bit of time with The Hobbit talking a lot about it, and we would have these big time skips. It was hard to feel very present in The Hobbit because you were always sort of like, this would happen, and then you would suddenly find out, like, the dwarves spent the next 3 weeks on the road, and so you were suddenly sort of like slurped back out to a much bigger sort of macro level. There weren't a lot of scenes, like for instance the moments that we spent in direct one-on-one conversation between Bilbo and Gandalf. Those were fairly rare in The Hobbit. That was something I didn't remember from my times reading The Hobbit before, but those moments were a little more rare, and so this one is a little bit more grounded. You spend a little bit more time sort of in media res as opposed to sort of describing the events of a day or the events of a week. You're actually in the moment, in the scene. Bitterbard says, I need to say I really like things beginning with hobbits gossiping and arguing about said gossip. Absolutely, that was a ton of fun. And just a great chance to like pull out some voices real quick, right? Just like get things launched off correct with some like really big characters, both for me and as a just reading the thing. It looks fantastic. Bitterbard says, hey, at least Tolkien didn't do the don't use any words with a Latin origin because that's bowing to the ancient Roman oppressor thing that Orwell did. There is definitely like, I think there's a sense that you want to keep Earth history out of your Middle Earth history, right? There's that sense of like, I want to make sure that I don't mention Christmas, for instance, because then it's like, well, wait a second, how does this tie into the real world? A lot of that can be tough to deal with. And Jem says, why they ring so true. Gems, how dare you? Dahlia says, just curious. Hold on. I missed it. It disappeared all of a sudden on me. Dahlia says, just curious, is anyone interested in a one-shot horror-based storytelling RPG on Tuesday night? DM me in Discord for details. Indeed. Get at Dahlia about that. And finally, Orly Rose says, The Hobbit as a children's book, I didn't think had the depth in relationships and the way the scenes are drawn out with intention and care that would not work as well for kids. Yeah, did you feel like there was a big age difference in yourself between the times that you read Hobbit and you read Lord of the Rings half bit? Did you feel like you were reading something at a very different level, or did you just sort of grow up with it?
I definitely like it was definitely tougher reading because I literally I read The Hobbit right before I started reading Fellowship. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was definitely a lot more difficulty reading Fellowship because of
it elevates
the word choices, and I mean there's just a lot more description. Honestly, like my ADHD, like it was harder to read Fellowship. Yep. Because it was like, okay, what is this? There was the action. Yep. But,
and the way that, I mean, just the way that the whole thing is structured too, like you can tell Tolkien, I don't know, it almost felt like there's been some speculation, and I'm willing to delve into the speculation, that the Silmarillion is much closer to the way he actually wanted to write. And The Hobbit was along the lines of like how to convey that to a child, and then The Lord of the Rings, instead of being like the ultimate pinnacle of his intent, was more along the lines of a happy medium between where he started and where he wanted to pull himself toward.
I think that is like very accurate. And I tried reading. After we read Lord of the Rings, my mom got us all a copy of Silmarillion. I was like, "Is this a joke? Is this a joke?" Like, who? What now?
Yeah, it's a lot of
literally what you say every other page in that book.
Yep.
It's good, but
It is good. It is world building stuff that you and I both adore, but to read it as prose, to read it as literature, is it's a trudging feeling.
Yep.
Especially for folks who may have focus challenges, like you and I both do.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, certainly there was a bit of that transition. I will admit, I actually had a harder time moving the other way, and that is because I did not read The Hobbit until after I'd already read Lord of the Rings.
Interesting.
I really prefer to read things in narrative order. I prefer to experience things. That's how I went through the entire Star Wars series, so I don't have any trouble with any set of 3 films. I'm also not like a mega fan of any of the thing. I'm a casual fan, but I don't have a problem with any of them because I just sort of watched them in narrative order, so I didn't have one to compare it against. But I didn't have that intentionality yet when I was younger, so I had seen that the movies were starting to come out, and I was like, ooh, I want to see what that's all about. But I was still in elementary school, I believe, at the time, and so my dad said, "You're probably a little young for that. I'm gonna have you check out the books first." And I don't even know if he was expecting me to actually pick them up because, like I said, I was in elementary school at the time. But I trudged through. I really pushed my way through. This is something I'm going to talk about a lot in the next episode of Shelf Confidence, because it's based on the Lord of the Rings trilogy book that I have on my shelf. But it felt like kind of a grown-up moment. I was definitely exploring this sort of world on my own, and then I went back to The Hobbit, and because of this sort of untethered, temporally untethered, non-scenic approach, where occasionally you get individual scenes where things are happening moment by moment, but it was a lot of just the overall description of what happened during the dwarves and their visit to Bilbo's home, right? They show up there, and then we will get snippets of dialogue from that, but it was a lot of just this important thing happened, so I'll mention it, and then we just continue to dally on through. It was a bit of a jump, but I'm glad both of us made it through it. Then again, there's the Silmarillion, and I don't know what to do with that. Orold does. I'm sure Orold has read the Silmarillion, and I'm guessing a few others as well. Jem says, I love the abnormal readings as a child. Sika says, I've got dyslexia, so I suck at reading, but that's why I love listening to people read. Hey! Welcome, Sika. I think you're in the right place. Let's see. Good Courage says, I had a TV family, not a book family, so now I really promote reading with my own kids. Yes! Welcome to the read aloud crowd. Do it. Read aloud to people. It doesn't matter if you do the voices, doesn't matter what, just do it. Hey, gang, read to people. Read to each other. You don't gotta be good at it, just do the thing. Orly Rose says, he wrote the beginning sentence of Hobbit scribbled on a scrap of paper, like this whole world started as a word dump. And I do wonder if that's true. I wonder, because I know he had sort of worked on developing languages for a while prior to that. Half-Bit, let me know if you've got any extra insight, but I know there's a place where it started to become a narrative, but I do, in my head before that, my understanding was he had already had a lot of the sort of world created, he just didn't have a story within that world to tell yet. Any insight? You might have dug into this about the same level I have.
I mean, what you just said is probably all that I know about that.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that, but I don't know anything past that.
Yeah, and I find that a lot of world building for me often arrives in the same way. I don't know if it's the same for you, Half-Bit, but both Half-Bit and I do a lot of world building stuff. We both really like tabletop RPGs, but also for other things. And we really like the process of describing, laying foundations, laying rules, laying societies and trends and stuff like that. But I often find that I get that stuff very early, and it's not until I've spent a little time there mentally that I actually suddenly say, oh, I've got a story to tell here. It's not just like a big backdrop. Do you find it's fairly similar? Or do you typically get struck with a story pretty early on?
I mean, as I'm world building and trying to create a campaign or something like that.
Yeah. Do you find I know what I want to pursue within this world, or is it just big open backdrop, and then eventually you figure out okay, I guess we'll start here and move toward this?
It is, I mean, for me, if we're gonna be honest, I have my characters, which is my party, right?
Yeah.
And I really like to create things based on them and what their lives are, and so I start I definitely start small, but they, each one of those characters
Kind of a seed.
seeds like something huge in the future, something way out there. I'm of course I'm envisioning our current campaign that we're playing, that I'm running with you in it, and
Yeah.
there are many things that are to come that the characters that I find inspire. That what if they encountered this?
Yeah.
That is kind of my world building.
Yeah, so tying characters, and that's interesting because although when I'm reading, my very, very favorite thing in the world is to look at the characters. I really love. I love settings. I love the themes. I love the stories that are told. Of course, as I've mentioned before, in any good narrative, all these things are tied up nicely together. But my very favorite, the top of my pile, is the characters. I love watching them. I love thinking about them, seeing how they change. And yet, when I'm doing some world building stuff, typically those characters will show up to me even later than a storyline to follow. Those show up very late to me, and maybe it's just because I so enjoy receiving them that generating them feels a little strange. I don't know. Orly Rose has shed a little light on this, so Orly Rose, thank you very much. Orly Rose says he had the Silmarillion and the languages, but the hobbits came from that scribble. He had the languages before the lore, and that makes sense to me. I think as someone who was a linguist and loved languages, it seems sensible that he would have delved in and tried to create this whole thing and suddenly realized, like, where does this fit in? Orly Rose says he built the larger mythos around the elves' history in notes and letters long before he touched The Hobbit, but he pulled The Hobbit into lore from that idea on scrap paper. There is quite a bit of it in his letters about it, but originally Middle-earth did not have hobbits. Oh, now, I mean, Middle-earth wouldn't be real in my mind without hobbits. That's very interesting to find out. Good Courage says, Sam and Halfbit, y'all did incredible. Thanks so much for your work, and thank you, Sidecar Punks, for helping make this possible. It means so much to me. Thank you a ton, Good Courage. Good Courage, thank you for being here as well. Let me see, what else? What else are we talking about in chat here? What are the things from y'all in chat that feel... I don't know, what are the things, especially from those of you who have not experienced this before, but what are those things that you really want to see pursued? What are those things where you're like, okay, we've got to start on this thing. I want to see where this goes. I want to find out more about this thing. What's that list for y'all in chat? And let's see. Orly Rose says, dude, I could talk about this forever. Yeah, I mean, I think we probably could too over time. Gems said Tolkien was huge into ancient languages and wanted it to be perfect. He and Lewis spent many workshops on that. Yeah, so there was this group called the Inklings, who our Inkjets writing group for Sidecar Stories is definitely sort of as an homage to them. I want to say thank you very much, by the way, to JCA. LOTR has a huge mythos to dive into and get lost. It does. Frankly, too big for me to... I think I could handle it if the Silmarillion was a wiki instead of a book, but it's tough to follow as a book. Yeah, which characters would you say sort of resonate the most with you? And I think we can push out beyond. Let's stick to before they've crossed the Brandywine. So we're talking mostly hobbits, Mr. Halfbit. Which one of those characters sort of grabs you most immediately? Which ones were you most interested in their development?
Before basically with the main four.
The main four, we do hit but before we've got like the full fellowship, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean. Without talking about like spoilers and things, I know you are a big non-spoiler guy.
I try to, it's so hard.
Which I appreciate. I think,
it is really difficult because some of these characters get way more development than you ever would have thought they would.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, Frodo was the one that I was like super curious what he's going, like, reading it. What is what is going to become of him? You know, what is he gonna do with this ring that Bilbo had for so long? And I think that is the main nugget that is driving this story, and what is going to happen with him as he goes off into the wilderness as a tiny little 3-foot creature.
Tiny little lad.
With 3 other tiny little lads.
Yeah, as his companions, more tiny lads.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. There's the question of the ring, but in addition, there's also just the question of like, what is it like? Who is Frodo? Because we get a decent bit of who Bilbo is at the beginning of this story, and then Bilbo's gone. Bilbo walks down the road, and it said, I mean, it doesn't feel too spoilery because it says, it literally is explicit in the text, he was never seen by any hobbit in Hobbiton again. That's it for Bilbo.
In Hobbiton.
Oh, what does this mean? Well, yes, but it is. I mean, it's that's a mysterious line, right? That is.
Yeah.
He's out. That is curtains for Bilbao.
Bilbao.
But you know, we learn a ton about. We hear a lot of rumors about Bilbo at the beginning of this book, but weirdly not at the beginning of The Hobbit. At the beginning of The Hobbit, we have some stuff sort of dictated to us by the narrator, this quasi-existent narrator, and then we just launch in and watch him go on his adventures, and we have to sort of figure out who is Bilbo by the actions that he takes. And it seems like Tolkien is approaching Frodo in the same way here. Frodo launches in, and we just spent a lot of time learning about Bilbo, who is now pissed clean off down the road, and who's Frodo?
It is really, really interesting reading this chapter. It was really interesting seeing, you know, this is all about Frodo, and then all about Bilbo, and then there's this Frodo character coming in every once in a while. Like, wait, who's this guy?
Yeah,
who's this guy?
Oh, cool. He's got a nephew.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden this whole scene happens, and then Bilbo leaves, and then we figure out, oh, this isn't gonna be about Bilbo. Mm-hmm. Which you probably think it's going to be, you know. It's definitely, like, oh, yeah. It's going to be about this guy, which I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, just a second. Hold on, I'll be right back. I need a prop for this next bit that it really is not going to be worth it. Just a moment.
Hi, folks. By the way, hi, Mem Knight. Miss you. I've got the stream to myself. Now I'm gonna be awkwardly quiet.
We spend a whole book hanging out with Bilbo, right? We discover the journey that he goes on. We know some of his friends. We know what he does. And we know about his special ring that he's got. And what is on the front cover of this book? What's that? What's the title of this book? Lord of the Rings. Of course it's going to be about Bilbo, right? It's Bilbo's darn old ring. And yet, no. We launch in, and it's about his little nephew. And we don't know very much about who Frodo is. We get a little bit of a note that Frodo might well be similar to Bilbo in that there's the two sides of him. He talks about how I love the Shire, and he talks about how I kind of wish I'd gone off on this adventure with him. That's the exact same stuff we get at the beginning of The Hobbit of I've got these two sides. Even though he's not a Took/Baggins, he's got those two sides that we talked about. The Took side that wants to go out into the world and the Baggins that wants to stay home. It looked like you had something. I'm bouncing to you.
I just wanted to say I love, like, this is maybe dumb, but I love that the first chapter of The Hobbit is an unexpected party, and I love that the first chapter of this is a long expected party.
Yes.
Like, it's just like smart, but you know, it's like maybe it's not smart, maybe it's easy, but it's so good. I don't know. I just love that.
It is smart because, I mean, it is kind of the, as much as the last chapter of The Hobbit saw Bilbo sort of comfortably settling down, a long expected party chapter 1 of Fellowship of the Ring, that is the end of Bilbo's story, not the end of The Hobbit. This is the end of the story that we get from Bilbo. This is the moment where we see that, hey, you know what? I know the last book kind of said that the Baggins side seemed to have won. He seemed to have wanted to come home and live in comfort. Actually, it's the Took side. Took side done won out in the end. This son of a gun has decided he's not going to live. He's not going to go into his old age. You know, old age is like, even for adventurous people, it's the time to chill out and settle down. He goes, nah, I'm hitting the road, baby. Give me my stick. This dude's 111. He hops a hedge on his way out of town.
He does.
he just jumps a hedge. Archer says, the bravest little hobbit of all, Bilbo Baggins. Hey, you keep that out of here. Live long and prosper. That's not going to make any sense to so many people.
I get it.
Okay, excellent. Of course you do. Sika says, I'm getting Goodwill Hunting vibes from Frodo, and I think that's a pretty cool comparison. Not necessarily the hidden genius as much as that strong sense of gotta stay here and gotta get out of here. Lots of inner conflict about that. Like they love the place where they're at in some ways, and yet there's a world out there that they long to see. I did the thing. I fell right into it. Oh boy. Let's see. What else has chat been up to here? Cobra says, I've got some cards. I can see if I can help to find them. Memnite says, how the heck are you throwing Star Trek quotes into Lord of the Rings? I'm not going to remember his name, so do you want to take this one, Half-Bit?
Look up The Ballad of Bilbo Baggins by Leonard Nimoy on YouTube.
Thank you. And no further explanation.
No further explanations.
You may deserve it, but you're not going to get an explanation. Dahlia says, instead of bitties, I'm doing Patreon level 9,000. Yes, indeed. And y'all, thank you a ton. I've seen the things happening over there. Oh boy, I've got even more. I've got more notifications now. Hold on. Let me see what's going on. Jack, hello. I see you. Marinvare, thank you very much. I think I caught that one before, but Jack's a fully new one. So hello. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for jumping over to Patreon. I love y'all. I hope you enjoy the behind the scenes stuff. JCA says, but wait, there's more. Let's see. Orly Rose says, also Tolkien being a total smartass in that because it took him so long to release and people were crabby. That's a big hesitation I would have about becoming an author. But then again, I think people who are authors, they probably just do it because they love to make it happen, not necessarily because they have like adoring people waiting for it. That's not their motivation for the most part. But yeah, I think we can look at Tolkien. What is his name? What's that fool's name? George R.R. Martin. George
R. Martin. Sorry.
Gerbil Martin. Groucho Martin. Groucho Martin.
That's it.
Known as the author of the Game of Thrones series. It's got to feel like a fairly similar. The moment I try to make a reference, it disappears from my head. If it's a title, it's bad. If it's a name, I will inevitably forget what it is. But because I wanted to say Song of Ice and Fire, but everybody knows it by Game of Thrones. But yeah, there's that similar sort of idea. Like people are clamoring for the further installments of that, and I think people were really looking. I did some research on this, and my understanding is that he had released The Hobbit. Fantastic, good, great. People really enjoyed it. And they were expecting sort of a sequel to The Hobbit, not necessarily this much more grown-up book. Look at that. If that doesn't tell you at least something, at the very least, in comparison to The Hobbit, much less all of the elevated word choice and more complex storytelling, I'm not surprised people were clamoring for it, but I do kind of wonder what the reception would have been like. I have to imagine it must have been a little bit like Half-Bit here, even though you sort of knew what you had to expect. Because you came from The Hobbit into The Lord of the Rings in a much more similar way to the original readers than I did.
Sure.
One to the other. But I'm really glad we got this graduated version. Let's see. What else is chat talking about over here? Jerry? Who is it? Bitterbard, I hope you have a fantastic evening. I hope y'all come back and catch me tomorrow because all this week I'm doing 2 streams a day, every day. We are well into book fair, so catch me again tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. If you want to know what the schedule looks like, you can check on Instagram or Twitter or Discord in the schedule tab. I've got it all over the place. Orly Rose says, but seriously, if you like George R.R. Martin, he created a whole world with a group of people who RPG'd with him. This created a world of short stories and anthropology spanning decades and dozens of authors. Look up the Joker/Wildcard stories. Interesting. I'm not familiar with that. Is this real? Did George R.R. Martin play some D&D?
I mean, how could he not?
Silly question. Silly question, Sam. Not worth asking.
Have you seen the guy?
Yeah, he looks like us. he looks like me if I put on one of those little hats, for sure.
And some suspenders.
Oh man, I could rock with some suspenders. I would wear some suspenders. Cass has told me I shouldn't. She didn't tell me I couldn't, but she told me I probably shouldn't. It's not like a look.
You should.
I don't know.
It's a look.
Is it a look for me?
It's a look if you look it.
It's a look. The moment you open your eyes, it becomes a look. I think Archer Kid is feeling similarly hesitant about it. Oh boy. Orly Rose says, what we are doing with Rositas actually reminds me of it. I'm going to have to check this out. Joker/Wildcard stories. I'll definitely have to check that out. Jade says, George R.R. is the Ron Weasley of fantasy writers. What is this? Just non-committal? What do we mean by that, Jade? What are we talking here? What does that mean, the Ron Weasley of fantasy writers?
I really want to know that.
We got to dig in. Jade, I got to know. Earlier, JCA says, I watched The Hobbit as a theatrical performance in school, but I never understood the story. Then The Fellowship came out as a movie, and I went back and devoured the books, and thus began my love affair with fantasy. Yeah, I want to see just like show of hands in here. Who of you people who are really into fantasy, or at the very least enjoy it thoroughly, your start was Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, or unlikely, The Silmarillion. Yeah. I mean, I had messed around with like, let's see, how far back could I go? I could probably point at the Magic Treehouse series. There's definitely some distinctive fantasy elements in that, but I would say it's it's something that I dabbled into for sure. And then as of the Lord of the Rings, 100%, this was my start in like, there are big old worlds wrapped up in these dense pages.
I want to say, this is random, but like I watch a lot of movies more than books, and like book-wise, this was definitely the first thing I got into.
Sure.
But like movie-wise, I think it was, I used to watch The Never-Ending Story constantly.
Okay.
So that was like my first fantasy. But like book-wise, this is my first fantasy stories.
First foray, first journey.
Yeah.
Jade says too much pressure. Jade will. Now, to be fair, we also went ahead and launched into some odd stuff and then refused to explain it. So Jade, I think you get a pass. I think you get to just say George R.R. Martin is the Ron Weasley of fantasy writers, and we can't fault you for not explaining it. Although I am very curious.
I want to see Jade wear a t-shirt that says that.
Yeah, like it's a I want to see it on a protest sign. Jade says, my start was Anne Caffrey, The Dragon Riders of Pern. Never heard of it. I have never heard of it. Anne McCaffrey I've heard of, but I had never heard of Dragon Riders of Pern. Oh, gotcha. Okay. He can't handle the pressure. Gotcha. George R.R. Martin can't handle the pressure.
Okay.
Okay. Makes
that makes
sense. I was going to say, I had never seen Jade shy from anything. But okay, no, that makes some sense. Yeah, I mean, and it is a lot of pressure, I'm sure. Memnite is saying, Dahlia is slightly before that. Dahlia is saying Narnia. I am not surprised by that. I'll bet there's a lot of Narnia folks in here. Sika, same thing. Martin the Warrior, Tales of Redwall. Yeah, okay, so it seems like... Go ahead.
Princess Bride as well for me.
yeah.
Orly Rose mentioned that too. Like that's definitely me too.
I have a question. Who here read Princess Bride before you saw Princess Bride? Is it anybody? Yeah, not I. I have not. I've not ever read it. I've only ever seen it. I've only ever watched it. But I am seeing, unsurprisingly, a lot of Narnia and a lot of Redwall. Let's see. In the Narnia camp, I'm seeing Dahlia, Sika. Orly says Lord of the Rings. Marin Vera says Magic Treehouse. Yeah. I'm seeing some Never Ending Story. And then over in the Redwall camp, we have got Memnite, a little bit of Sika. But yeah, I mean, Redwall was something I just didn't discover it. I didn't find it until after I'd read The Lord of the Rings a couple of times, actually. But Redwall is a really great sort of way into this sense of like getting to love a different way of life. This sort of feudal, sometimes futile, sort of hokey, sometimes adventuring, sometimes swashbuckling. All of this kind of swords and sorcery, I think, is ultimately what you would call it, but fantasy in general. Really great ways in, and frankly, I would say between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, I think Narnia and Redwall both kind of hang out there in the middle. I would say if we're just talking about sort of reading level, I would say Hobbit, then Redwall, then Narnia, then Lord of the Rings. If those are our four. Are you familiar with the Redwall series, Half-Bit?
I am familiar of what they are. My older brother was super into them growing up, and I don't, honestly, it's kind of odd. I don't know why I never read them, because they looked really interesting. My oldest brother was super into them. My mom read them constantly, but I never read them, which is very odd.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing. I think I really discovered them right at the tail end of the age at which they would have been very appealing to me. I still probably would have read them and enjoyed them, but what I mean, like, they were made to appeal to a certain sort of age group, and it's a little on the younger side. And I think I discovered them as I was like heading very soon before high school, very shortly before high school.
I feel like we loved when I was a kid, I loved like Wind in the Willows. I think maybe like I imagine it was like and like Frog and Toad and things like that. I think I imagine it was like simpler kids stories like that, and it's like I don't want to read that, like I'm too old for that now.
Yeah.
Or something like that, which there are really cool fantasy stories, much more complex than, Frog and Toad and Wind in the Willows.
Yes. I know what you mean, though. Yeah, you show up and you've got talking mice, and yeah, maybe some of them carry swords, but ultimately you go in, you read the first 3 pages, and you're expecting, okay, I know what I'm getting here. Just so stories, like you said, Wind in the Willows, just very simple, sort of like episodic, just a shade north of a story for little children. A bedtime story for little children. And Redwall turns out to be more than that. But yes, I certainly understand like how one would have come to that conclusion and said, maybe I won't mess with these right now. I've got some other stuff going on.
Yeah.
Delve into some other things. Grimmelkin says, Narnia for me. I have an unfinished copy of Princess Bride. I have been frequently ill, so during hospital stays, I would have people that come to visit me read a bit and sign the book when they stopped. Then I got better, so the book remains unfinished. Well, in that case, congrats on leaving that one unfinished, Grimmelkin. I hope you never finish it. That seems like it's the only time I've ever wished that on someone. But if that's your pattern for that particular book, I hope it remains on your shelf. I hope it collects dust long into the future. Orly Rose says, I love the mixed up files of Basil E. Frankweiler. Let's see. Did I murder that from memory? I think you were close. It sounds familiar. Basil E. Frankweiler. I've never read it, but I'm familiar with it. Let me see. The Mouse and the Motorcycle. Again, familiar, but never read it. From Dahlia. Louise says, oh, those were my punk rock years. I was rebelling against the world. The good old... Oh, man. Luis, how can we get you to put on a sweet denim vest and get a mohawk?
I dare you.
I feel like Luis, maybe that's just how Luis lives. Who knows? Who knows? Impossible to tell. But to return to Lord of the Rings, I think we have discussed many stories today. We sort of branched out plenty. Talked about The Hobbit, talked about Narnia, we've talked about the Redwall series, all sorts of things. And I think we can all pretty well agree, even ones that were contemporary, like Chronicles of Narnia, all had huge influences from right here. This one really it kind of formalized a really informal art of storytelling. I think a lot of myth and legend and lore is a lot of fun, but it's a little bit like the SCP Foundation, which is like spooky, creepy stuff. A new kind of lore set. What else could we call it? It would be a little bit like, honestly, a little bit like the state that the realm of Residus is in right now, where there are all these different elements, and people tell stories about them to one another. But at the end of the day, it is just sort of loose stories told around loose little legends and myths and everything. And Lord of the Rings was one of the first do not at me, the first things to really take these things and loop them all together into one cohesive thing. And not only that, but take that cosmology and that mythology and push a narrative through it such that people could experience all of this stuff in a way that ties together, not just, oh yeah, my grandmother used to say that if you left your boots out during the night, then brownies are going to come and repair them for you if you leave them a snack. I don't remember how brownies work, but y'all, I thank you very, very much for joining me. Mr. Halfbit, you even more than most, because you brought a ton to what we did tonight. I mean, that really went so good. I'm very excited about how that went.
Thank you. Thank you for those words, and honestly, thank you for just giving me this opportunity to do this, because once again, it was just super fun.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Y'all, you are all fantastic. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you will, join the Read Aloud crowd. Go read something out loud to somebody else. Nonfiction counts, but reading off the back of a Windex bottle does not. So pick something with some story to it. Or poetry, I don't even care. Just read something of literary value out loud. Read to people. It's fun. It's a good time. Go check out some more fantasy stories and look for the places in which you might see some influences from this, or the ways in which it may have deviated from the things that we have read over in The Hobbit and such. If y'all would like me to read the rest of this book, there is one way to make that happen efficiently. There might be other ways in the future, but the ways that I know of, there is one big way, and that is head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/sidecar stories. That is the place to make all of this happen. I would be delighted if you would head over. It is book fair, and so that is the link for that. But of course, just in general, head over to Patreon. You can find out more about what we do here. And if you want another stream in the week, don't forget, folks, Patreon. And also don't forget that just in general with things like this, a lot of low-level donors will quickly outpace one huge donor. So if you're looking at this thinking is it really going to be worth it? It absolutely will be toward Sidecar Stories in general. So I appreciate everyone who has jumped over there at any level. I appreciate you a ton. And Halfbit, I hope you have a great night. Thanks for hanging out.
Thank you.
I'll see you again soon.
Am I leaving now?
No, not necessarily. We're about to leave together. We're gonna sign off at the same time. Are you ready?
Okay.
Memnite, Archer Kid, Orly Rose, Louise, Sika. By the way, Sika, thanks for showing up and then coming back. I love to see new people who are like, yeah, I'll dip into this nonsense. JCA, Dahlia, Gwendog, Memnite, Marinver, Archer Kid, all of our folks who have just recently upgraded or become patrons. Dan, Lucy, Jade, Marinver, Jack, Deborah, Dahlia, Sparkle Lovegood, Luis. All of these people are folks who have gone ahead and either upgraded or just become patrons recently. All of these are new. This is all new stuff. So everybody, y'all are amazing. And of course, to my existing patrons, people who've been around for a while, thank you a ton. I will see you all tomorrow at 11 a.m. Literally all of you. You're all going to be the mandatory attendance, or it's going on your permanent record. Hey, I'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.